Thank you all so much for coming. My name is Dipali Mukhopadhyay. I'm an assistant professor here at SIWPS and a member of the Saltzman Institute, which is kindly hosting us for this event. I'm really excited to have these three scholars with us. I've known them all for some time and in different capacities, but they have been doing some of the most exciting and important work on Syria that's been happening. As all of you will know, it's very difficult to do research in and on Syria these days, but these three have actually made it in and done the work, and so they're in the midst of producing, and made it out, yes, that's true. In the midst of producing a book which they're going to talk about with us today. So let me introduce them in the order I think that they're going to speak. I'm going to leave it to them how they're going to organize themselves. But immediately to my left is Adam Baczko, who is a PhD student in political science at the EHESS in Paris. He's also the general editor at Noria Research, which has produced some of the most kind of cutting-edge work on Syria these days, and is currently an Order, Conflict, and Violence Fellow at Yale University. To his left is Gilles Dorronsoro, who is professor of political science at the Sorbonne, a non-resident scholar at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, and author of much important work on Afghanistan, including Afghanistan Unending Revolution, which was published in 2005 by Hurst and Columbia. And to his left is Arthur Quesnay, who is a PhD student in political science at the Sorbonne, and is a research fellow at the French Institute for Near East and an analyst at Noria Research. So I think we're going to give you about 30 minutes or so to talk, and then we'll open up for a discussion.
Okay. Thank you. I would like to thank Dipali, of course, the SIPA, and the Saltzman Institute to host us. And I would like to thank you also, New York, for this beautiful view here. It's just amazing. I would like to first to remember you why Syria is still important. There's two things, maybe. First is that the war in Syria is destroying the Syrian society, destroying the country literally. It's destroying the cities, it's destroying the historical sites, it's destroying the people, probably 250,000 today, even if we don't know exactly. It's an incredible brutalization of the society. Just look on the internet, the video that are circulating in Syria and about Syria. It's extremely violent. And more than that, half of the population was displaced the recent 2 or 3 years. So it's one of the most cruel and incredibly violent conflict we had in the last 20 or 30 years. And beyond that, it's also a global crisis. You remember maybe some, it was 2 years ago, 18 months ago, 2 years ago, you had an op-ed by Luttwak, and the title of the op-ed is saying everything, let them bleed to death. That was the idea. So it proves that you can be, cynic, really cynic, and not very clever. Why? Because, cynicism is not the proof that you're clever. That's the point, you know. Why? Because this crisis, we refuse to intervene, basically, in this crisis. And what happened? Regional destabilization, 5 million refugees, serious tension in Lebanon, of course, and in Turkey. Jordan is a little bit more under control, but still. You have terrorism, which is not a big deal in strategic terms, but it's impacting very much the relationship between Muslim and non-Muslim in Europe. We can speak about France, for example, but in other countries too. And more than that, you have the emergence of the Islamist State. The real emergence is the last summer, in fact. And then you have a new player in the international game. No respect for the border, no respect for the idea of citizenship. The idea that it's an unending war against the other states. And of course, you have sectarian violence that are increasing every day in Iraq and in Syria, because we cannot speak actually about a civil war now just in Syria. It's an Iraqo-Syrian civil war. For all these reasons, we have been obliged, mostly the US, but also Western countries, to intervene again in Iraq and in Syria, bombing the countries. And what's happening, of course, is since we don't have real allies on the ground in Syria because we refused to intervene before, the situation is looking pretty much desperate these days. So that's why we need to have a look on this crisis. And my second point is that what we are going to say is based on the field work, on our direct experience, which means that it's limited, probably plenty of mistakes. We hope that it's not big mistakes, but plenty of mistakes, of course. But the fact is that we don't have reliable information about Syria in the media, and so you have to go there to understand what's going on. And we could talk about that later in the Q&A, but there is a problem with the way the media are reporting the situation. What we did is very classical: interviews, direct observation, just been there, what's happening, what people doing, market, interaction between people. And we did that in December, January 2013, and in August 2013. What happened, the first trip was pretty safe, but it was very cold. And then you understand very directly how it is to be a Syrian in winter, which is not really a good place. And the second field work was in August 2013. And then, very bravely, we decided that after 2 weeks it was okay. We prefer to go home because the situation was a little bit out of control security-wise. So that's the idea. So what are we going to present now? 3 points. First, we are going to talk about the protest, 2011, March 2011. It's the beginning of the protest in Syria. So we're going to try to understand why do people protest in Syria. The second point, I will address this point. The second point is about the building of alternative institutions, 2011-12, even part of 13. It will be Arthur. And last, we'll talk about the fragmentation of the insurgency after the spring 2013. And we are very much in this moment now. So the first point is about why do Syrians protest? Maybe it's useful to remember that middle of March 2011, you had an incident in the city of Daraa, the south of Syria, and a bunch of teenagers was tortured by the local police because they wrote a few things against Bashar al-Assad on the walls, you know, which is bad, but not to the point that you're supposed to be tortured. And what's important here, because it's not really unusual, what's important here is that people started protesting in the street, hundreds of people in Daraa, and more important even, in all Syria, very quickly, you had protests. Protests in Damascus, protests in Hama, Homs, Aleppo, everywhere. And this protest, if you want to characterize the protest, it's everywhere. It's pacific. It's about reform, and then after a few months about regime change, but first about reform, democratic reform. And it's mobilizing sometimes hundreds of thousands of people in one demonstration. So it's huge. It's really the whole Syrian society is moving. Having said that, we don't know if half of the Syrian population was supporting the demonstration, or 20% or 80%. It's impossible to say. But something huge was going on. And this is a puzzle. This is a puzzle. And why? First, just if you want to look at it this way, I think all the specialists of Syria before the event said that it was very unlikely. When you're an academic, you never say impossible because it's kind of tricky, so it's not impossible, but very unlikely that you could see any kind of huge protest in Syria. And it happened. So it's a puzzle. So why is this happening? And then let's understand first why people were sure that it was not going to happen. The first answer is probably that everybody knew in Syria that the regime was ready to use extreme violence against any kind of protest. You remember the repression in Hama in '82. Probably 10 to 40,000 people were killed, and the way they were killed is interesting because they were killed by the army in a kind of regular operation of the army, bombing certain district in Hama. So it means that it's not a police operation, it's army directly operating. So it means that at some point the regime was able, and probably, and it's still the case, to use directly a high level of violence against demonstrators. So that was the first thing, we knew that. And what's interesting is that this demonstration, you know, started in March and continued until the autumn 2011. Means that months after months, people were still going in the street. And at the same time, the regime was arresting hundreds of thousands of people. Most of them were tortured. 10,000, over 10,000 were killed. We have proof because we have the pictures. The pictures were leaked by a doctor working for the regime. So it was extremely violent. So the question is, why do rational people, if we assume the fact that Syrians are more or less like us, what do rational people protest when first you have high risk and no clear reward and no personal reward, because people were protesting, manifesting, the signs in the demonstration were about democracy. Why do you do that? So of course, if you believe in rational choice theory, you have a problem because it's typically a free rider situation. It's not working. So if you go further, you think about the critical mass theory, Granovetter and all this, it's not working. Why? Because you don't have the so-called extremists, the people, hardcore protesters who want to protest anytime, whatever the cost. You can't find these people in Syria. People who were in the street were not activists. They were not militants, not even activists. So we have a situation that we cannot understand in the classical, in the frame of the classical rational choice or theory of mobilization. There is something special, and the closest thing is the protest in Germany in 1989. Because why? Because it's relatively spontaneous. It's people going in the street in their name. There is no organization, nothing. No unions, no political party are pushing them. And it's important to say this because now you have a narrative that is emerging in some newspaper, even journals, about the idea that from the beginning, the Syrian protests were actually done by hardcore Islamists or people who had a political agenda. I don't think it's true. Everything we found in interviews is showing the contrary. So what's the solution of the puzzle? The solution of the puzzle is the addition of two things. First, a change in the way Syrians were seeing political opportunities. That's called the Arab Spring, actually. And second, a deliberation process. I'm going to explain what it means. But first, the Arab Spring. The TV was the key, actually. The Syrian replaced football, the European football, by demonstration in 2010. So they were passionately watching the demonstration, occupation of the Tahrir place and everything on Al Jazeera, Al Arabiya, CNN, etc. And then you have this construction of a new category that is the Arab Spring, means that all these Arab regimes are corrupt and they are going to fall, one after the other. Okay, so it's all the same. Bashar al-Assad is not different from Mubarak, different from Ben Ali. All these guys are the same. and they are going to fall, or sometimes you have to push them a little bit. It's the case of Libya. But anyway, it's over. So people change. You know, they thought that after all, maybe a revolution was possible. And when you start thinking that revolution is possible, it's happening. It's totally classical stuff. And the second thing is that, considering that you don't have any kind of structure organization able to mobilize people in Syria, what happened is that people were talking together, I mean, small groups, watching the TV. And in Syria, you have to remember that this is a crime. I mean, speaking about politics or meeting people in the street, more than 3 people in the street, it's a crime. Politically, you can go to jail for this. And people actually start speaking. And that's we call deliberation, you know. Speaking about what? Speaking about what could be an Arab Spring in Syria. It's about democracy, what are the objectives, what are the means, and basically they try to reproduce the model of what they thought was the Arab Spring. It's not about community, it's not about sectarianism, it's about democracy, and it's pacific, it's non-violent. And they formed the idea of that. And after what happened, basically, is that they went to the street. And that's the third part of the puzzle. What are they doing, actually, in the street? How do you protest in Syria? And basically, you protest first, that's the first striking thing about Syria, small groups or alone. Basically, you don't want people to know that you're in the street. So we had plenty of very interesting interviews where, for example, an imam in a mosque is saying, okay, the Friday I was giving my talk, I mean, to the people, very classical stuff, supporting Bashar. Then I was leaving my neighborhood and going to another neighborhood where nobody knows me, and I was, and I was demonstrating there. So people don't want the other people to know about what they are doing. And it's going very far, because it means that even inside the family, it's not clear that you want your cousin to know that you're going to protest. So it's a matter of trust. So you're alone or you're close friends. Close friends, we find a lot that it's the guys in the neighborhood playing football together since they are 7 or 8. So they trust each other. They trust each other, they know each other, so they go together in a demonstration. That's the first thing. The second is that the demonstration are starting from the mosque, not necessarily from inside the mosque. It could be just outside the mosque. And on Friday, for a very normal, very strategic reason, it's the only place where adults, men, essentially, can meet together and the regime cannot do anything about it, basically. It's very difficult to say in a Muslim country from now there is no Friday prayer. It could be a little tense, you know. So it's impossible. And at the same time, the police can put informants in all mosques, more or less, but they cannot put enough police forces to immediately intervene there. So basically what the game was that this Friday it's this mosque, the other Friday it's another mosque. And it wasn't especially religious at that time. We are speaking about the first months. It's just the place it's the most convenient to protest. And you protest very quickly. The first protests are kind of flash mob, you know. Means you protest on 100, 200 meters. And then everybody's running just to avoid to be arrested by the regime. So it's a very strange way to protest in a way. No sitting, of course. You have to understand that trying to do what the Egyptians did in the Tahrir place was totally suicidal, because the regime would have intervened, and few people tried sitting, just not possible. So actually, what they did, the repertoire of action actually, is totally defined by the repression of the regime. They had very few opportunities to do things, and they try, and basically very successfully. The last point here is about coordination, because Until now, I spoke about very local things. Why the movement was able to become national, really? It's mostly through Skype and Facebook. Skype and Facebook are not very important to mobilize people, but they are very important to give a sense of belonging to a national movement. Why? Because every week, people on Facebook, I'm not sure it was totally a democratic vote, but they were voting anyway for the slogans, what they wanted to say the next Friday. And there is a feedback here, because you see on TV after, and people were using a lot of cell phone and cameras, and then you see on the media that in Dara, Aleppo, people are in the street and the signs are the same. So then you understand that you're belonging to something, you have something in common. That it's everywhere. That the regime cannot control the movement. And the last thing, and then I will give the floor to Arthur. The last thing I would say is that the regime never tried to negotiate with the people in the street. Never tried to negotiate, because from the beginning, the idea that the survival of the regime was through the radicalization, violence, a lot of snipers firing against protesters, a lot of snipers, people directly attacking the people in the street, and so on. So from the beginning, there was a choice here. Bashar al-Assad chose to use violence and to radicalize the opposition. Thanks.
Well, thanks, Gilles, for this introduction. I will come back on when we reach the field in Syria. We get at this time two main interrogations, where really two observations that we cannot answer easily. It was something very common inside the insurgents' territories, and we talk about a lot, we observe it, we make interviews about it, and then we try to build a work about Syria insurgents, about these two main observations. So the first one is why the insurgent group were not fighting each other. I mean, according to different comparison with Afghan insurgents or even Iraqi insurgents, in Syria, no group are trying to destroy the other one or to control the whole territory, even to get all the resources for himself. There is a sharing of the resources, even the territory they try to make command room operation, where they can elect the main commander, the chief commander, or different official. So it was one dynamic very important to understand how the insurgents group were working all together. Second point was the construction of civil institutions in Syria. When we arrived in Syria in December 2012, this process was going on since 2 months. It was something very interesting to see how people try to organize themselves to build some judicial courts, municipalities, governor councils, try to administrate their territories and to develop the insurrection movement. So just to understand why and how it was going on, I will come back in the first point on the main situation, I mean the military situation, were characterized by the total absence of politico-military actors. No group, no insurgent group was trying to build its own political program and to stop the other groups or try to collect other groups in one single political program to develop. Contrary to that, and despite the absence of clear hierarchy inside the insurrections, the absence of council to make clear arbitration between different groups, most of the groups military groups were working together to develop a common strategy, try to make some kind of coordination to get some to get the regime to fail the regime, to put the regime in check in some place. this why the situation was going like that. First point is that it was no political parties in Syria before 2011, and we think that it's the main point that Syrian insurgents have to build everything from the beginning when the insurgency, when the militarization started. They could not at this time, in the very beginning of the insurrections, they could not rely to some experiences of the mobilization. They cannot go to some association or political party who make them able to organize themselves and even to build some new institutions and that. So they have to rely to their own resources, and they have to go through their own negotiation, internal negotiation between different groups and that. In the beginning of the revolution, it was no political party outside Syria who can have some influence inside the countries. The second point why the armed group were not fighting each other is that fighters were not coming from one community, one single city or territory. They were not relating to one tribe. We heard a lot that tribes were playing a big role in the organization of the opposition. It was totally wrong for most of the Syrian citizens, and people were just trying to build some new groups according to their facilities. I mean, if they are in one city, if they find a way to gather in one city in rural areas where the regime cannot go to fight them, then this place will start to be the main camp, and then they can build different groups from this place and then dispatch in other place in Syria according to their strategy. This is very important point to understand that the military situation was going just according to the repression of the regime and according to the different resources that the people could find. When the regime left all the north of Syria, in summer 2012, then this part became the main place, the main territory for the insurgents. And we can find most of the institutions that we can find at this time, and it's why we went to this place to travel and to work about the insurgent. It was because it was very safe place where you can reach to every kind of institutions. So you can find some judicial courts with different levels where people try to organize normal life, like with different applications for the right. So you have, of course, Islamic right, but which is mixed with the traditional Syrian law. Also, you have family law, criminals, military tribunals were also created for different by militia, by the different military groups to make their own law inside the insurgents. And in the local level, you can find different municipality councils for each village, each city, each quarter, each district of cities. You have one municipality, one council, who try to organize everything relating to the public affairs or to the civil life. It shows how the Syrians were trying to develop the revolutions according to a common view about what should be the state. Military groups were trying to organize themselves as a new base of like a new Syrian army, as their name, Free Syrian Army. They tried to copy everything coming from the regime, from what they knew since 2, 3, 4 generations about the Syrian state. I mean, even the terms that they use in their military operations are exactly the same that they can bring from. We can find the regular Syrian army. Even in the civil institutions, basically they were trying to make institutions as it was in the regime part. I mean, they changed the law. They try to fix some new in the free areas. They try to fix some new common models. You can can speak, you can develop your own associations, try to make your own organization groups to develop your Manteca, your district. But in general, they try to copy very much the main institutions who are relating to the state. And Syrian insurgents make the differences between what is the state and what is the regime. And for them, the regime colonized the state. So if they find a way to copy the state, maybe they can make one alternative to what happened in the regime part. Then how people move, and that was, we were very concentrating about that, how can people move inside those new institutions, inside those military groups. Within the military groups, the ease with which the fighters are moving from one group to another one is really interesting to show that according to the Free Syrian Army, all groups are equals. I mean, if you are fighting in Aleppo and then because your family is in Homs, you need to come back to Homs, and then you will get some new military applications. You can do that. It's very easy to change your military from one group to another, and even for the different resources, people can move sometime with their goods from one place to another one, and most of the institutions are equals in different places. Then the access to the different institutions depend of one thing was very important, the experiences that people can get inside the revolution. And we get this idea that it was the development of a new social revolutionary capital that each people develop during the revolution. I mean by revolutionary social capital, how much people, the guy, have experiences in the different demonstrations, how much can he get some relation inside the new revolutionary network with growing with the insurrection. Then also to get a new position inside the different institutions, the skills of the volunteer, the skill of the militants is very important. I mean, if before he was judge, engineers, or maybe have some military background, then he will be sent to a different place, to different institutions. For example, in Aleppo, we can find, we visit a lot the court, the civilian court, and in this court you have a lot of, a lot of attorney, but also one judge with effect from the regime, and then also a lot of students who were students in the Islamic law before the 2011, and those people, because they received some formation, because also most of the official judge and the rest of administration left the Syria, flee the war. They try to achieve the administration, to make working the new bureaucracy of the revolution. As we can see in the insurgent territories, the middle class become very, very important because of first these skills or its application inside the insurgencies. Most of the middle class was trying to, because the revolution take part mostly in popular areas, because the regime could not get to these territories. It was very difficult for the military of the regime, of his police security forces, to strike against the protester inside the popular district of different city. So those districts start becoming the main center for administrations, institution of the revolution movement. So the middle class become very important to lead the movement, to lead the institutionalization of the movement. And of course, when you are looking the opposition outside Syria, you can find other people who have other social capitals, who have other social background. Mostly the elite, Syrian elite, who left the country in the 80s, but also Syrian elite who just left the country in 2011, 2012 because of the war, try to organize and most of the time find a way to monopolize the institutions. I mean, they have the capitals, they have the goods, the resources to speak English, to have the to deal with international organizations. So find a way to be at the lead of the revolution outside Syria. So thank you, and I will let the speak to Adam for the first part of the.
So very quickly, because we are getting long here. If you dismiss an explanation of the civil war today by being, intrinsically Islamist from the start, if you understand that you had a unanimous institutionalization process within the opposition parts, then we need to answer the remaining questions. How did we get to a situation we're in now, where you have a fragmented territory, where you have at least part of the Syrian territory, which used to be under insurgent control, under the control of the Islamic State, which, in terms of radicalization, is the highest state that we've ever seen in Syria. What we're arguing is that this radicalization, fragmentation of the Syrian territory and of the Syrian insurgency, far from being an endogenous process, far from coming from inside the insurgency, it came from outside. It came from outside in two ways. The first one by transnational actors, the PKK through its local branch in Syria, the PYD. And what used to be Al-Qaeda in Syria when it was still united, that's one. And second element was funding. Funding played a huge role in the radicalization of the insurgency and its fragmentation. So first, the PYD as a local branch of the PKK. The PYD came back first from April 2011, this is to say a month after the demonstration had started, under an agreement with the regime. The regime delegated the repression of the demonstration in the Kurdish area to the PYD. This agreement became more and more formal when the regime was losing ground. So in July 2011, the army brigade stops patrolling the street and the PYD takes over. I might do this lapsus more than once. And by August 2012, when you have a large FSA offensive on Aleppo, the three Kurdish pockets at the north of Syria, the one in Qamishli, the army stayed in Barak, but in Afrin and Kobane, the two that are north of Aleppo, the army was forced by the PYD to leave the territory so as not to give a pretext to the insurgency to attack the two Kurdish parts. In those areas, the PYD started building its own institution on an ethno-nationalist logic, separated from the rest of the Syrian nationalist dynamic. And they started to put those regions under an economy, under an identity regime that was very different from the rest of the territory. I'll come back to that in a second. The second transnational groups were those related, in a way or another, to Al-Qaeda. Again, here the regime plays a very important role. It plays a very important role because in May 2011, when the demonstrators asking for the liberation of demonstrators jailed since 2 months, the regime answered by freeing a couple of hundred of people, none of them being demonstrators, but former jihadi that have been fighting in Iraq, that had been arrested in 2009 by the regime under pressure or as a good gesture move towards the United States. At the moment, France, America was trying through Qatar and Turkey to negotiate with Bashar al-Assad. And so from that moment, if you look at all the Islamist brigades in the FSA and outside the FSA, all the leaders, with no exception, and we're speaking Liwa al-Tawhid, Sukur al-Sham, Khalal al-Sham, Jabhat al-Nusra, all those four leaders, for example, were all Senaya prison inmates. They were freed in May 2011. Again, one should not go too quickly, though I will have to go quickly, on those Islamist movements and don't put them all into one bag. There's a huge difference between groups such as Sukur al-Sham or Liwa al-Tawhid, who were types of group within the Syrian insurgency, and Jabhat al-Nusra on the other hand, which was the Al-Qaeda branch in Syria. So if you try to look at that, you can do quickly a typology in 3. You could look at those brigades that were with an Islamist ideology, and they were very heterogeneous. So you could find in Liwa al-Tawhid, the brigade would use a very Islamist name. Tawhid is a word that has a lot of meaning. It's also named, for example, in Mali of one of the most Islamist group. But in that case, you would see exactly the reverse. You'd see a group where you had Christians, a lot of secular, people not praying, people being religious, and people being Islamist. And you'd have a very heterogeneous group until the end, until the disparition actually of the brigade 6 months ago. On the second level, you could find groups like Ahrar al-Sham, which was trying to build a party. So you'd have a group which has long-term agendas, right? You would not hear such a thing when you speak with activists from or fighters from Liwa al-Tawhid. In Ahrar al-Sham, you'd have people telling, we try to retain people, we're trying to organize, this country needs organization. But they would still have a national strategy. If you'd be speaking about Afghanistan or Paris or Washington, they would tell us it's not our matter, our problem is to get the regime down. Jabhat al-Nusra was very different here. It was already before the split, before the appearance of the Islamic State, it was a group where you had first a lot of foreigners, a very different outlook physically. I mean, you'd have a lot of people just dressed in black and hiding their face, a lot of them being foreigners. You have structurally some very different characteristics, especially the fact that people would have to do 2 pledges. So they would have to pledge to fight against the regime, and after a couple of weeks or months, according to the behavior of the person, he would do a second pledge for international jihad. It was a very ambiguous group in that sense, because though the main aim was Bashar al-Assad, then you'd have the second pledge, which was blurring the image. And the third element, which is essential to understand the relation between the insurgency and Jabhat al-Nusra, is the specialty into suicide attacks. And think of the insurgency as an underarm insurgency with very little military support against an army. And before 2010, there was a very old army, legacy tanks, legacy planes. You still speak in terms of number of the third army in the Middle East. So it was an important army in that sense. So suicide attacks were very important to attack bases, to open the doors, to try to get through a line of tank, a trench. So Jabhat al-Nusra fighters were tremendously important in the fightings, and they got a tremendous reputation out of it. Right? They have this reputation of being honest and willing fighters. So you had an endogenous factor of Islamization within the insurgency. Martyrology is very important. The more people would be dying with the videos, people being brutalized, the more people would do those martyr march, keep the image, and try to find comfort in religion. That's one important factor. But the groups in themselves were much more important to break the insurgency. And here the split between Jabhat al-Nusra and the Islamic State is central. Why? Why? Because it ended up this ambiguity that you had with Jabhat al-Nusra before April 2013. So when the group split, it split over 3 questions at the same time. The first one is strategy. What is the most important issue here? Bashar al-Assad or jihad? And the jihad against the world. And the split among Jabhat al-Nusra and the Islamic State was clearly along those lines. That's one of the issues. Second was, who should have the lead, Syrians or foreigners? And by foreigners, especially in the Islamic State, you would mean Iraqis, right? Because a lot of the Jabhat al-Nusra former leaders, when the group were merged together, were Iraqis. And that was going on the nerves of a lot of people. And the last issue that was very important was what strategy. And that's, we'll come back into the question probably about that, but that's a very interesting question that is going through the whole of Al-Qaeda. Should you territorialize, build institution, and govern the Islamic State strategy? Or should you be, a type of Trotskyist vanguard party, just specialist, which is what Jabhat al-Nusra kept doing until very, very recently. And even they still keep this professional fighters outlook. Right? In that sense, you can see how the Islamic State is deeply foreign. The use of takfir, this is to say the accusation of someone, the excommunication of people as not being Muslim as a justification to kill them is something you would not see in any other groups. Foreigners in command you would not see in other group. They had a rotation system to ensure people will never stay in the same place too long and not create personal link. Again, something that was unique to the to the Islamic State. And strategy was clearly a dividing strategy, right? When the Islamic State started fighting, they avoided all the main front. Contrary to Jabhat al-Nusra, who would still be on some of the front, the Islamic State would never be on one of the main fronts. They would play where? Sectarian fronts, Latakia, where you had Shias. They were one of the big factors in the fact that you had the slaughter in June 2013 in Latakia. They would try to get to Salamiyah, which is a city famous for Ismailis. And they would center the fight against the PKK as a fight for the border, but also as a way to get people on an ethnic base. We have a problem with the Kurdish and the secular. And second was to try to get strategic points. So when we were there in August, the Islamic State would not take big chunks of territory, but they would take all the points next to the border where intercrossal cities, places where you have resources, and try to get those small points one by one as a network of places. And it's only when the insurgency started reacting, instead of letting themselves be attacked one by one, be assassinated, then the Islamic State actually reacted, territorializing and building up its territory over the two countries. Yeah. What's the, I'm going to go very quickly over the last factor that's important, funding. Funding played a tremendous role in another way. First, the way the West, the United States and Europe reacted was actually a lot, you'd have a lot of formal recognition or formal support, but very little money. So most of the groups which align on secular lines for ideological or strategic reason ended up being sidelined. On the contrary, the Syrian war got really much integrated into the Iran-Saudi competition, which both countries play on sectarian line, right? Where Iran has a strategy where it tried to align with the Iraqi regime, the Syrian regime, and Hezbollah, drawing more and more a Shia analogy. You'd have the Shia line, and Saudi Arabia using a lot the Islamist group to try to fight against the Iraqi regime in Iraq, making sure that you have no problem in Bahrain, playing on a Sunni line, right? And most of the funding would go to the insurgency from the Gulf. The United States were not giving much funding, Europe was not giving much funding, but they were letting Qatar and Saudi Arabia do their own funding, which themselves, they would not centralize much. So there was a strong incentive for groups to present themselves as Islamists, and we've met a lot of groups that if you look the videos on YouTube, they look like hardcore Islamists, and you start speaking with them and you discover that, not really, but you ask them, so how did you do the video? And they tell you, well, we need money. So they told us, we had someone telling us, hey, you should start by an opening on God. You should finish on God. You put fightings and you say all your martyrs. And they would do the videos in this way to get the money. The problem is the more you portray yourself as Islamist, the more you actually have to uphold it if you want to keep having funding. So it's very performative, right? It's not without consequences on the long range. The other factor in that sense that Saudi Arabia and Qatar were choosing purposefully more Islamist groups that were closer to their sectarian strategy. On the contrary, international organizations, the UN, were paralyzed between Russian support for the regime, Russian will to uphold a line where no intervention can be done, as after Libya, after Iraq 2003, which has been a shock to more than one country. You would see no possibility of negotiation because the actors did not want, but because also the institution would be paralyzed. And think of Syria as a regional crisis in such a context, between the refugees, between these transnational groups. You have homologous effect between the countries. So you end up having Sunni in Iraq, which feel them that they have same situation as Sunni in Syria. The Kurds in Iraq, they have same situation as the Kurds in Syria. The Shia in Lebanon, fearing they will happen the same than the Shia in Syria. People, the Sunni in Tripoli, thinking, oh, it's our brother in Syria that are dying. And even some very absurd or historical thing, like the Alevi in Turkey, feeling that they're the same as the Alawi, right? Which is historically wrong, but a very strong performative effect today. And Alevi were central in the Gezi protest in Turkey against the AK Party regime. So what's the consequence of that? The consequence of that is a big fragmentation of the territory in four types of territory: a territory under the control of the insurgency, a territory under control of the Islamic State, one under control of the regime, and one under the PYD. And you end up having four economies, more related actually on the regional level than to the territory. So the currency has a different value. When you move, we would always have a different, you could use dollars and you would hear that dollar to Syrian pound would be always different, and not small differences, right? From 60, 70, which would be the Syrian official chain that in some places could be upheld, to 300, right? The price of bread would be different according to where you are, because you have a different organization of the economy. The northern insurgency would be much related to Turkey, so you'd have the international aid playing a role, and you'd have the grain reserve of the north of Syria. It would be very different from what you would have in the PYD area, which were surrounded at that time. So you have a fragmentation of the market. You have fragmentation of the market and also connection of the market towards other places. It's easier to go from Gaziantep in Turkey to rebel-controlled Aleppo than to go from rebel-controlled Aleppo to regime-controlled Aleppo, right? But it doesn't prevent circulation. You'd have what was called Rifah Passage in reference to Rifah, the city in Egypt, and to the tunnels in Egypt and Gaza, where people would find a way to pass and get bread in the rebel area or go to work in the regime area where they would still be paid, get their salary there that the regime was still paying. So you have an image that is quite complex, where you have several, at the same time, a fragmented economy related to the regions around Iraq, Turkey, Lebanon, Jordan. At the same time, still circulation. You see it also on the identity level, and that's why when we draw lines on, the typical line you feel like drawing in the Middle East, right? Shia, Sunni, Kurd, right? 3 lines. It's a much more complex image. It's an important one because it's not false in the sense that PYD had a strategy of promoting a Kurdish identity, recreating a Kurdish education, welcoming refugees but putting them under a subaltern status. You'd have in the insurgent Islamic State areas a very strong exclusion of anyone related to the Shia, and related as them relating them, right? Between Alawi and Shia, they're putting them in the same bag. Even the Ismailis, though differences are huge, but they would all be Shia. And today, being Ismaili or Shia or Alawi in the insurgent region is impossible, but you'd have big differences between what the Islamic State does, creating the dhimmi status, subaltern status to the Christian, and what the insurgency is doing, where you can still have some room of moving, where you have still Christian living, where you have still attempts of building relation. And you would see 2 different degrees. You could actually think of a third one, which is the exile community, where here you can still be Alawi, you can still be Shia and follow and support the insurgency. You still have some Christian, but there are already tensions that you would not see in 2011, right? So it's a move that even people exiled in Paris, London, Washington are not able to really stop. And the last one will be the regime playing on the minorities. Well, I'll conclude on 2 things. 2 things that are quite important for us. The first one is, if you look at Syria, we started, as Arthur was saying, with a puzzle, right? Syria was not like what we know, like Afghanistan where we work, like Iraq. The groups are not territorializing, they're not fighting with each other. So we started wondering why ended up doing that. Arthur gave you a couple of answers. The weird thing that we ended up understanding is that in the end, we are seeing exactly the same trend as in Iraq and Afghanistan. This is to say the most organized actor wins. If you look in the long range, who has been taking more and more territory and taking more and more importance, the groups that are able to act as one party, as one group, the Islamic State and PYD especially, they're able not to have resources, as we tend to always look, but to accumulate and use resources, right? The important question is not how much resources do you have, it's how able you are to use those resources within an organization and to accumulate them towards further use. That's one thing. And the second is to think of the Islamic State today as a very important object, right? We don't know how long the Islamic State will be in the position it is, but at the moment it is, the way the Islamic State has been able to take Mosul in June and to expand over the 2 territories and building institution, contesting effectively the border without being able to raise it, gives you a phenomenon that's very, very interesting, very exceptional as far as what we've saw. We're seeing a political form that is playing outside of the international rule in a way the PKK has never been able, for example, in the region. But we're also saying a sectarian dynamic that can be very threatening, right? In the situation we are today, there is no reason, if the Islamic State would fall, then the Shia militia advancing would not be killing Sunnis. On the reverse, if the Islamic State advance, they tend to slaughter when they advance. And you're seeing that we are ending this book on the end of the Syrian civil war as a civil war outside of Iraq, but it's only starting. Thank you.
Okay, well, I have many questions, but I'm going to hold off. If you could please tell us who you are and keep your questions as questions, that would be great. First in the back, all the way in the back, please.
First of all, the issue of ISIS. How do you guys understand how this because they're acting as a conventional army at this point. It's sort of like if you look at Mao's theories of the Cold War, they're at the third phase now. They're operating very openly with brigades, etc. And I'm just curious to get your take on that. Secondly, the issue of clandestine cooperation, lack of cooperation with Iran and Syria prior to the civil war. We know that Syria and Iran cooperated, sort of turned their heads away, or were actively cooperating in sending guerrilla fighters into Iraq during the occupation. So this particular infrastructure, when the state collapses in 2011, and Al-Qaeda has fled or been forced into Syria, what do you know about all that? Because this big mishmash is sort of a big hole in our understanding about how did they merge. You know, because they're clearly force multipliers when they go and create armed units. And so that's something vague in everything I've heard from you guys a couple of weeks ago, and most of the other conversations, completely vague.
So I'm going to just collect 2 or 3 questions at a time, and we can. Yes, and then.
Thank you very much. My question is sort of building off of really briefly mentioning how certain groups, secular groups, got sidelined in the absence of Western funding. So building off of that, now that there is a sort of international coalition and a Western strategy within Syria, I was curious how you view this coalition strategy in terms of Assad versus ISIS. I mean, you talked earlier about how groups in Syria were saying, okay, is it jihad or is it going to be Assad? So, and that strategy question for the groups within Syria. My question is really about the West and how do you see there being an ultimate strategy to deal with Assad? Because there's a very clear strategy on ISIS, but I think we're lacking clarity on the Assad.
Steve?
Thank you for the insight. I think you started the conversation off very well by framing it within social movement perspective, political opportunities, resource mobilization, and the framing of the Arab Spring. Can you carry that discussion forward to a potential solution to the ISIS scenario, specifically addressing, first, whether an indigenous movement is still possible? You have groups like the Arab Kurdish fraternity, the Rakas being large silent groups. Is there any potential for those to actually coalesce into a national movement and overthrow ISIS? And second of all, from a foreign policy perspective, what is the role, if there's a role, of external forces such as the U.S. in facilitating these resistance movements to conduct nonviolent resistance? Taking a page from Gene Sharp's books and particularly George Soros with the Qaeda Revolution.
Tu prends la première.
Okay. Just about ISIS, how they work, how they're organized, and how they develop. As you said, no, they are like a conventional army. They are trying to move as an army. They have tank divisions. They can shuttle some city. They are like an army. How did they grow up? How did they develop? I'm working since 5 years in Iraq now, and it was amazing for us to see those people relating to Jabhat al-Nusra, who was the first ISIS group in Syria, coming and try to develop themselves, to impose their law on the territory, and try to make like a territorialization, to control the road, to control the resources, and then to stop the other armed group from the FSA. ISIS succeed because most of the resources are coming from Iraq. It's like an autonomous movement. They have self-funding. They can make their own organization according to their own people. I mean, they have an elite, they have some officers, they have some military room, very well organized, and it's very difficult to target them and to stop them. In 2011, when at the end of the US occupation of Iraq, when US Army left Iraq, ISIS was totally destroyed. I mean, at this time, Al-Qaeda in Iraq was very, very weak, just some settlements in Anbar, but very, very weak. Then the Syrian civil war gave them the opportunity to intervene inside Syria and then to reform them, to build them as a new army, which were not going to fight like an insurgency against one occupation, but as an army against the Bashar army and mainly against the other group from the insurgencies. And that's why, since 2 years, ISIS is preparing themselves to come out as a regular army with a territorialization programs and to rule a large territory and to administrative the different peoples. Then I let you the second question.
Maybe I will try to address two questions. First, maybe the cooperation is between Iran, Syria, and Iraq. I mean, it's the three of them. And it means also that what we are seeing actually is that in Baghdad and in Damascus, the governments are more and more sectarian. So we have to see that all together. And what we see, for example, is that the Iraqi army right now is acting in a way that is not going to make the Sunni trust it. You know, what we are seeing more and more is ethnic cleansing, both from the Kurds, of course, from the Islamic State, and from the government in Baghdad. And you have the same thing in Syria, basically. And it's a way to answer your question about is it possible to see some kind of mobilization from below against the Islamic State? The answer is most likely not, because people do not have a way to defend themselves if the Islamic State is losing ground. Basically, if you're an Arab, you're near the Kurdish area, or if you're Sunni Arab, near the Kurdish area, or an Arab in Fallujah, Sunni Arab in Fallujah, you know that the Islamic State is probably not what you're dreaming of, but at the same time, if the Iraqi army is back, it's going to be hell. So in this kind of circumstances, it's very difficult to see an alternative. And the second thing is that the Islamic State is just killing anybody who's resisting. So right now, it would be very difficult to think about something like this. And the last point is that since we work very hard to weaken the more moderate movement in Syria, I don't see any possibility right now to see at the same time a weakening of the Islamic State and a re-emergence of the more moderate insurgents in Syria. But you can elaborate on this. Yeah.
I'll come back to that in a second. I just want to be sure. The Iran-Syrian question was before or after the revolution?
Well, before, you know, the whole networks and then how it sort of, I mean, we don't know how the whole thing fell apart, but they were cooperating, training, helping facilitate Al-Qaeda come in, and then 2011 everything goes balooey, but what do we know about how they then come back in and then establish themselves in that period of time? There must be some story, but I don't know, I'm just asking.
But I'm not trying to understand. You mean Al-Qaeda today with Al-Qaeda in 2011 as its relation with Iran and Syria?
Yeah.
Well, I think the issue is quite different here. If indeed during the Iraqi war you had some possibility of common interest in 2011 towards fighting the Americans in Iraq that could unite Iran, Al-Qaeda operatives, and the Syrian intelligence, it's very different from the situation today. I mean, those are two very different things. Even the strategy of Iran in March, April 2011 was rather an act of moderating, right? Before becoming an actor that is heavily sectarianizing the war. In April, March, was one of the actors trying to tell with Qatar, that used to be at that time an ally, doing common initiatives, trying to get Bashar to find a deal, to be more moderate, to open the regime, because Iran, though today the strategy is becoming more and more sectarian, and you have to see how the Syrian war has creating, a circular effect of sectarianization, right? The Iranians have a sectarian strategy that they were not having before to the same extent. In 2011, the actors were first trying to avoid it, right? The regime Bashar al-Assad had a very clear idea that if he starts opening up, the regime will fall, which might be true. I mean, in that sense, it's not stupid. I mean, it's something very, it is a rational strategy to radicalize from a Bashar point of view, right? But Iran and looking on its regional perspective did not have the same interest and tried to moderate it. The third question is very important. Well, there are two ways. The question on secular sidelining, which I mean, you still have, for example, a very strong insurgency in the south. You still have fighters in the north in the Syrian insurgencies. The Iraqi movements still exist, though they don't have the same power as the Islamic State. But today, if the US or the West would try to engage with them, first it would be too late. I mean, we are starting to be really late. Right? You always say it's better late than ever, but we're really starting to be late after late after late, and really, really late. And that's exactly not what we've been doing. I mean, when the United States started bombing, the very idea of bombing Jabhat al-Nusra was a strategic mistake. I mean, I do understand that there was a rationale of bombing a group that is preparing attacks, terrorist attacks against the West. That's not a rational move, right? But you are attacking a group that is supporting the insurgency to fight against the Islamic State. You giving them a message that if the American builds an alliance with the Syrian insurgency, they are the next. You're giving them every interest to start fighting an insurgency that is already pushed between the regime and the Islamic State. So what happened in Idlib in the last weeks? Jabhat al-Nusra started fighting an insurgency already surrounded in 2 fronts, right? And they took control of most of Idlib. Right? So first, it would be late, but we're still not starting. We still haven't really done it. I mean, we've been giving a couple of anti-tanks weapons, but it's really marginal compared to the level of the war. So there's no strategy in that sense of really engaging with local elites, Sunni local elites.
Can you speak up, please?
I'm Navid Hassan Boura from Gordon Wilson School of Political International Affairs at Princeton. So I read your 2 pieces very carefully, and I think they speak to each other somehow. And it's because of one element that it seems that you're not really emphasizing. So on the second piece, which is the field work, which is amazing and was done in a very dangerous time and place, what really is recurrent is the fact that these groups basically change to each other, and there's not a very clear border between these groups. The first question that I have for the fieldwork is, what is the relation of FSA how it was then to ISIS, how it exists now? And the reason I'm asking this is because the people that I talked to over Skype, the rebels, most of them, the most radical ones, they had relations to Iraqi insurgents. They were telling them, no, I have a brother who was killed in Iraq. I know this such and such in Iraq. But they weren't obvious, and these were FSA people. So people in 2012, the most active people in Damascus, they had these connections. So I wonder how active these connections became real after the funding came in. So that speaks to that kind of an emergence and the Canary line someone speaks to the first one, which is the danger of being very clear in your position to an authoritarian government, to a very dangerous authority, right? So people, as you said, a lot of these things, these groups are flashbacks. So you show up, and they're very ephemeral. So what I'm saying is, so knowing that, what would be the importance of this, the weak ties? Weak ties.
Weak ties.
Weak ties. Okay, sorry. Yeah.
Because a lot of these the dynamics that I see, and the fact that there are no groups to negotiate with, especially was mentioned in the presentation, there were no groups to negotiate with, and exactly because there were so many weak ties that active and interactive on the interpersonal level, in the sense that you see an effect on the group level, but individuals themselves are sometimes actually unaware of it. So if you talk to them, they would just tell you about their family connections. They wouldn't tell you about how on the street in 2 minutes they saw a group of other people and they became engaged and then they decided. So the thing is that the field work in 2013, early 2013, somehow speaks to those weak ties and the emergence of these groups, which, as you said, mirrors the Islamists in Iran, Baczko in 1989, Mujahideen in Afghanistan, and another. So it's 2 different phases, leaderless movements, within organization. So the two questions I asked, FSA and ISIS, and
Seth?
Hi, how are you? My name's Seth Lurcher. I'm an active duty Army officer. Appreciate you guys' time here. You spoke a little bit about the difference between al-Nusra and ISIS, specifically the debate over leadership in Syrians versus foreigners. Would you guys say that is there any difference in its participation in the insurgency and the way that it treats the way the two organizations treat the Syrian people more specifically? And what are your thoughts on that?
Je prends la 3, tu prends la 2.
Je prends la 1.
Tu prends la 1 aussi. La 1 et la 2 dans ce cas.
Ah oui, je commence sur la 1.
Vas-y, vas-y.
Yeah, thank you, Nawid, for your question. It's a complicated question, actually. Let's start with something. The situation we've seen in Syria until the summer, basically 2013, is the one where the military units had no political programs. They were not belonging to a political party. And that's a huge difference with what we saw in Afghanistan. All the literature is very clear. I was not there at that time, but all the literature is very clear. From the beginning, if you want arms, you have to get support from political parties. So the structure of the game is totally different. And then from the beginning, when you have a military unit in Afghanistan, it's a political military unit, and it's a territory. You see, it's very clear. It's perfectly clear in Afghanistan. It's exactly the opposite in Syria. So that's the first thing. You have to see the game, the way the game is moving in Syria. It's exactly it's becoming Afghan, but it started from a very different point. And more precisely, if you don't have territory, if you don't have political parties, you find people who can be connected to Iraq. But it doesn't mean that you don't have, how to put it, different groups have different kind of political sensibilities. You in Idlib, it's not the same as Raqqa, it's not the same as Homs, and so on, okay? But at the same time, it's not structured the way the Islamic State have been from the beginning. From the beginning, the Islamist group coming from Assad jails, actually, have a political program. They are political groups. It's like the PKK. So you have two different models. We tried to explain that in an article in the spring 2013. You have two totally different kind of groups in Syria. And of course, the more organized group, territorialized group, they won the war, basically, because they were able to accumulate resources. Yeah.
So this point that I'm making is the point that Tokyo made, which was, you know, once you're revolutionary, if you want to change something, you have to use the institutions that exist there. And so the Raqqa that you guys went to, and you told me, so you visited, what happened to it once it was taken over? So the institutions, did it just evaporate to Yale, or were they somehow taken over by ISIS? So what happened to the organizations that you guys are talking about?
Okay, that was your question. Sorry, I did not get it. Yeah, okay. First, we don't know in plenty of places because we don't have access. Most likely, part of it survived because it was municipalities. They are doing technical work. It's very likely that all the judiciary institutions disappeared or were totally reframed, remodeled. I think they kept part of the technical staff, and this part they need it because it's the basic function of the state. That's what we guess, but we don't have clear information. That's why we want to get more interviews about this. Okay. And so the second question about the weak ties. If I understood the question, basically, there is something I did not say in there because of not enough time, is that actually it starts from very strong ties. People are going in the street with their close friends. But then what you see after a few months is the development of networks of militants. So it's becoming a kind of special social capital. You know other people who are who are activists. And these guys were the guys who built the institution later. All the guys, for example, in the municipality of Aleppo, they were coming from the demonstration, the Pacific demonstration. So it's the same people. And they are different from the people in the military groups. Okay, is that so? What I mean is that what's happening is that you have strong ties at the beginning, no weak tie during the demonstration. Then the networks, activist networks, are forming very strong ties. All the time they think we are a family, we are working like a family. Okay, and so it's changing the whole thing, because then be part of this kind of network. It gives you a work, it gives you a place, it gives you prestige in places and so on. But this is over right now, because all this structure disappeared. But in 12, 13, it was quite true, we think.
The Al-Nusra Islamic State differences in terms of participation in insurgency, it was really a central divide between the two. It was actually one of the reasons of the split. I mean, the split in operational terms were between membership, right? You had a lot of Syrians in Jabhat al-Nusra. It's very difficult, you know, we have no data on that, but when you would see a group of Jabhat al-Nusra in January 2013, you know, half of them were in a way or another Syrians. You'd have a lot of Syrians in the Jabhat al-Nusra groups. When they divided, a lot of Syrians went with Jabhat al-Nusra, and a lot of the foreigners went with the Islamic State. But the core issue was, what do you put first in your agenda? And the Jabhat al-Nusra has always been adamant about, even in the discourse, but also in the practice, to fight Bashar al-Assad in terms of position in the front, right? While the Islamic State, you know, at the moment they were still all moving in the same areas, where you'd have trucks of the Islamic State and you'd have trucks of Jabhat al-Nusra and trucks of FSA, so summer 2013. Well, the Islamic State were putting emphasis on the secular in France. I was saying, Latake, Jabhat al-Nusra, which was also present in Latake, was very present on the most intensive regime front, right? Hama, getting in the south, where the Islamic State in the beginning was not even trying to get, right? It's not interesting. There's no territory to take there. So Jabhat al-Nusra would always be a sort of frontline fighters. The Syrians would be meeting, which even those who were opposed to Jabhat al-Nusra were saying it's very good, you know, they're going on the first front line, they're going to die, so, you know, let them come, you know, it's not a problem. They're actually fighting where they should fight. You'd have a lot of people telling you, well, we had quite a few fighters that told us, well, there was this fight, I was saved by Jabhat al-Nusra, because contrary to all the rest of the guys that have no military experience, that are fleeing, they stayed on the front, they moved as they should, and they took me back to our front line. So Jabhat al-Nusra had not only a good reputation, but they had, in their practice, they were present in coordination rooms, right? You would, in the Aleppo coordination room, you'd have a representative of Jabhat al-Nusra. The Islamic State never did that. They never tried. They never wanted. That was not the plan, right? So here you have two very, very different movements. And then, you know, there's a whole, it says a lot about two very different international jihad strategies that are coming out. It used to be an internal debate to Islamic State. If some of you have ever had the occasion to get your hand on Management of Chaos, which is the book by Al-Bakr, which is an Al-Qaeda polemist, it's sort of pre-Islamic State type of pamphlet saying, you know, we should use chaos whenever there's chaos and take those territories and do Islamic law and show we're better than that. This is not what Jabhat al-Nusra had. Jabhat al-Nusra was not doing that. They're starting now. That's a start, really.
The second part of this question is, how are they treating Syrians?
Part of the movement is Syrian. I mean, part of the movement in Jabhat al-Nusra is Syrian, so you would not see them governing. So you had, you know, it depends who you are. Let's answer the question differently. It depends who you are first, and that's very interesting because that tells you a lot about what's the dynamic in a civil war like Syria. Are you Alawi? Are you Kurdish? Are you Sunni? Are you Kurdish Sunni? How do you dress? How do you behave? So, for example, we met a lot of people at the moment where you had a lot of fight between the Syrian insurgency after Islamic State started fighting the PKK. the Kurds were very afraid of going to Aleppo, but you'd have a lot of movement of Kurdish people going from Aleppo to Kurdish area where they would be living to do the exam, for example, because exam did not stop. You'd still have university exam. And what they were doing was very simple. They would present themselves as Kurdish in the Kurdish area and present themselves as Sunni in Aleppo. Right? They don't say I'm Kurdish, say I'm Sunni. And that's perfectly right. You have a lot of Kurds, and even in the Islamic State, right? But they don't say they're Kurdish. They think of themselves as Sunni. So you'd have, at that time, you'd have no groups already who would allow an Alawi or a Shia to go through the territory. I've met one very courageous Alawi woman who moved through the territory at that time, and she would use the fact she's a woman and put an integral veil, right? Not being visible. That was the only way for her to move, which gives you an idea of how much an Alawi has a freedom of movement within those territories. But if you would be Sunni or even Christian to a certain extent, you'd have no problem with Jabhat al-Nusra. You might have problems with Islamic State according to a political position and according to where you're going to be connected with your family, where you're from.
I think that internationally, Barzani's Kurdistan had lots of support, but not Rojava. Do you think it's because of the affiliation with PKK? Or like you used it interchangeably, like PKK and PYD, but I'm from Turkey and we see them as two different, like we accept there's an affiliation, but we also see them as two different organizations. So it also has a political reason, of course. But I always wondered why Barzani has much more support than the ruling Syria.
My name is Noria. I'm a PhD student at University of New Jersey. I come from Indonesia, which you can say is the largest Muslim country in the world. So I just want to know, like, the ideas of Islamic states in Syria, will it be contagious to other parts of the world, like Indonesia? And what will happen if it's spread out? And then how to overcome that? Because Adam said that, like, it will use the management of chaos. Ideas. Thank you.
Kurdish political parties are very divided, and the most particular point is to be divided. I mean, in Iraq, Barzani have his own political movement with his own trajectory, and it has nothing to do with PKK. I mean, you know about the war between Barzani party and PKK in 96. Then there are very, very bad relations. And when PKK find a way to come back in Rojava, in Syrian Kurdish areas, PDK tried to stop them, tried to avoid this movement, was trying to support Syrian Kurdish political parties were against PKK and tried to reinforce different groups, local Kurdish group in Syria were trying to fight against PKK to stop them. Then Barzani don't have strategic political goods to get in Syria. Barzani don't have, it's only symbolic matters for him. There is no petrols. It's very divided Kurdish territories in Syria. So Barzani don't have any matters to influence to try to go in this place. Then because the PKK come back in Syria, it concerns Barzani because it makes the PKK more influence, more powerful in the region. So he tried to balance this power. That's why he sent some hundreds Peshmerga in Kobane last month, try to show that his party is active in Kurdistan of Syria. But in fact, on the ground, Barzani tried to stop and tried to do everything that he can to stop PKK influence in Syria.
Can you also elaborate on the international support?
Yeah, international support. Basically, Barzani received most of the Occidental support. Iraqi Kurdistan is like a Turkish colony now, so most of the Turkish businessmen are going there to do business with oil, with goods and that. Is traditionally Barzani is the best allies for most of the country in the region, for Iran, Turkey, Western countries and that. Of course, PKK not. PKK is fighting since now 30, 40 years against Turkey. and didn't succeed to show himself as an international regional actors, and traditionally is not. I mean, he's coming back in Syria mostly because of his truce with the Syrian regime and because of the coercion of his military group. Then it's difficult for him to, even if he built a lot of democratic institutions, as we can say, as he said, he's not able to go through the international institution and to show himself as a local movement, even as a popular movement.
Yeah, just to add something, what we've seen is clearly that there is not much difference between the PYD and the PKK on the ground. Actually, it's clearly people who are in charge are often Turkish-speaking people. If you know a little bit the structure of the PKK, you find exactly the same thing in Afrin, for example, or in Kobané. So we tend to think that it's a local branch, but it's not an independent movement. So that's our point of view. For the other question quickly, and then after I will leave the floor to Adam. I don't think there is any kind of contagion exactly. What we are seeing is probably two different things. First, there is a radicalization of the Islamist movement, and one of the reasons, not the only one, but one of the reasons is that nobody thinks that election is going to give you power anymore. After what happened in Egypt, you know that if you want to be in power, you have to make a revolution, and revolution is going to be a bloody one. So that's very clear that we are in the trend of total radicalization, because in most of the countries so far the Arab Spring failed to change the structure of the state. So that's one thing. The second is that people tend to use the name, the affiliation with the Islamic State as a way to have local prestige, probably also to instill fear in their opponents, and it's a way to be in competition sometimes with other local groups. And the Frenchman who was killed in Algeria actually probably was killed because of this. There was a competition between two groups, Islamist radical groups, and killing a Frenchman on YouTube, I mean on video and so on, was so Islamic State that it gives prestige in this very marginal radical movements. So I think there is these two things at least, and so you should not suppose that because they think they speak about the Islamic State, it means something concretely in the way they are structured or anyway. I don't think, for example, that Al-Qaeda in Yemen is, or Boko Haram in Nigeria has the same structure as the Islamic State in Syria and Iraq. So we have to be careful, even if people are going from one field to another because they are circulating. And the last, my last comment is probably about identity, and or maybe you want to speak. No, go on.
So yeah, I would add to I was thinking some about identity. I mean, the Islamic State is coming into a period in which there is a genuine opportunity for sectarian strategies. I mean, this dimension of sectarianization of conflicts is not something unique to Syria and Iraq. I mean, in Lebanon, in Ersal, you have an appeal to a group that will put itself as a protector of Sunni. I mean, even if you go outside of the Levant area and you think of Pakistan, where in Pakistan Sunni Shia fightings are becoming more and more common, and that's a new feature. I mean, it has not been like that before. I mean, the Shias in Pakistan becoming more and more the enemy figure, more than the Indians, right? Which is really new. Well, in Afghanistan, it's not to that extent, but it's a country where that's not impossible to think of it. In Yemen, the fighting is becoming more and more sectarian. In Bahrain, the dynamic is becoming more and more sectarian. So you have an opportunity for a group that would present itself as a protector of Sunni against Shia. The second, that would be the fourth part where the Islamic State has a certain appeal, is that it is really perceived among the Muslim world as a revolutionary group, as a group proposing something as an alternative. And I think we underestimate it. We underestimate it, especially in our societies, where marginalized people that our state or our society have pushed towards their identity tend to be, for some of them, attracted by a group, using exactly this identity toward which they are pushed as a flag, as something you should be proud of, as something you can use, as something that is good. And that's not a coincidence if there's so many Westerners in the Islamic State today. I mean, they are central.
I'd like to ask a question. Could you, the three of you, describe for us a little bit the mechanics of the field work? Can you give us a sense of how you got access, what kind of relationships you had to build before you got there, how you moved around, and particularly how you had a sense of, in a fairly short period of time, being at the mercy at some level of the subjects of your research, how you can get a sense of, is this the real story? And these are, of course, people that are desperate to get a particular narrative or set of narratives out there. How you go about verifying, triangulating, etc.
Well, I wanted to add something just about the Islamic State between. There is something very interesting about the Islamic State. It's the movement that's been able to reconcile more or less Saudis and almost reconcile Saudis and Iranians. So it gives you an idea of the extremely powerful effect it had on the region. So since 6 months, less than 1 year, you have a major shift in the Saudi policy, in the Middle East, and even beyond the Middle East. Just, I'm not going to comment on this, but it shows that some people are very, very, very afraid of this kind of movement. For the mechanics of field work, I'm going to start, and you finish. Yeah. So probably the first thing is that it was not very complicated. Contact you can make before not that useful, actually. So the idea was to move with the wave, to go where things are going. So you speak to people, they introduce you to another people, and you go somewhere. And it's very easy when you can move outside the organization and institutions the way we did in the first trip in December, January. And frankly, the most important problem we have is that we were cold all the time. So that's never been so cold in my life. And it looks ridiculous, but actually it's true. We are very cold. And I've worked in Afghanistan. I know a bit about cold, but this was especially bad. So that's the thing. When you're able to move outside an institution. So the question of trust is basically solved by itself. Means when you're invited, you arrive with bus. Arthur was the man who was very efficient in getting us invited everywhere. So after 10 minutes, Arthur had found a place to sleep and some food and everything. When you ask people what they were doing during the demonstration, and again and again and again, you have the same, more or less, very close, the same narratives. Basically, you can trust that it's not exactly what happened, but people are not lying to you. After you have to be careful about the reconstruction, but basically there is no manipulation of what you are. There are manipulations, but not in the narrative. It would be impossible to organize. The only place where there was clearly a way to use us and to control the discourse was with the PKK, the PYD. That was the place where we were very much under pressure to understand how great Jalan was, and this, which we were a little bit skeptical of. So I don't think it's worse than basically all the field work I did in Afghanistan. It's more or less the same. You complete?
Yeah, we did approximately 250 interviews with people, so it's mean that we are doing every day like 5 or 6 interviews. Depend how the people were coming, how we were able to move, and the situation also. Firstly, we try to focus about the military commander of the insurgent insurrection, but it was very difficult to keep them, and in fact, it was not very useful. We are just trying to find if they are if they have a common social background, socio-economical background, and that. But it was not very useful at the end. Then we are focused mainly about the institutions, especially about judicial system. We can explain a lot about how the situation is going on the field, how exactly people are dealing each other. But then the most interviews things that we did was the external interviews that we can get. I mean, normal people who try just to survive in the crisis. And we spend a lot of time with different families in different locality in the north of Syria, just to understand what was the perception of the peoples. And maybe that was the most important part of this work, is that we give a lot of importance about how people can calculate on the ground. I mean, you are in the civil war, then how you can think your own positions inside this field and this work, and what are the different strategies of the people to find a way just to survive, but also to have a daily economic negotiations or social negotiation. It was some wedding, a lot of things that give you a lot of information about how the civil society is still working in the insurgent part.
Yeah, I'll just add 2 things. The first one, which helps eliminate what Gilles was saying, is that you have to imagine the Syrian insurgency areas as very disorganized area in that sense. And that's a great freedom for an academic. Because basically you want to leave a place and go across the street and go somewhere. You go and people don't know where you are, and you change your network. Which, you know, in Afghanistan, if we work, we stay with the people we work, and then we have to come back to Kabul, or sometimes you must wait, you know. Here, that was not the case, absolutely not. You would go somewhere, you could leave them and go somewhere else. And people would often forget about us in a part of the room, and they would start saying things that, you know, if you think of it rationally, you'd be like, maybe you should not be saying it in front of us, you should be more careful, maybe. But that's all right, we can take notes. And a second one that is quite, I think, quite important to understand the way we work. We worked as academics, and I think this is quite important. You can do research in a different way than just, you know, if the logistic is very fluid. What makes us academics is how we've built question hypotheses before going there, how we change our hypothesis all the time. So we would spend 2 or 3 hours every day basically putting ourselves away from everything else, trying to think, what does it say about the social dynamic? What does it mean about the mobilization? What does it say about the hierarchical structure? What did we forget? How should we continue? Where should we go? So, you know, we had plans to go in some places, we did not. Whenever we would have some surprise, we tried to think of it in theoretical terms, try to say, what does it mean? And try to all the time rebuild our theoretical question. So, you know, if in a sense we speak of that as a straightforward thing when we present it, the building of it has been full of rebuilding hypotheses, understanding that here there is a weak part what no one is talking about, but everyone in Syria is, so there must be something important. And then trying to verify. Arthur went in Jordan, in Lebanon. We've worked in Turkey to have people from various provinces, seeing if we have very different things, using the differences to try to understand what do they mean, and sense that I think that's what we mean when we try to do sociology in a field of civil war.
Okay, so I think we are just about out of time. If everyone could, oh, I guess we have maybe one. Is it a quick one in the back? Yeah.
What studies have been done on the propaganda that comes out of ISIS? propaganda.
Propaganda of ISIS and other
You know,
groups.
what have you gotten from in the field? The films that they're sending out to the world. You know, what sort of serious studies do we have that interpret how people are receiving this? To an external audience, internal audience?
Oh, to who they talk. Well, that's not something we would take from Syria, because in a sense we worked in the moment ISIS had not territorialized yet. For example, a question for us that is very important, which we have no answer, is what are the governance institutions of ISIS? To which extent they're real? To which extent they're propaganda? Something we're not able to talk about because our fieldwork is from August. But the video is obviously oriented towards outside. If you look at how they built, I mean, you know, they are built to be heard in the West and the Arab-speaking world. If that answers your question.
Well, thank you, all three of you, very, very much.